Okay, so I experienced my loss back in 2015, March 2015. His name was Bryant. It was my first pregnancy, and the way it happened was kind of crazy. So I actually found out I was pregnant very early on. I was about 6 weeks when I found out, and I was very excited. I told my boyfriend, we were ecstatic, but we decided not to share the news with anyone right away because we kind of just wanted it to keep it between us and celebrate that moment. So I only told close family and friends. I think I only told my mom and like my best friend, and that was it. I didn't announce anything on like social media or anything like that until I was about maybe 16 weeks. So I was well beyond my first trimester. And the way it happened was one day I was working full time at the time, and one day I was at work and I was just having like really bad back pains. So I went and I talked to my boss and I was just telling her, hey, my back is hurting. I think I need to just go home and rest. So I went home, I laid down, took about a 2-hour nap, woke up to use the restroom, and I saw that I was bleeding. So I think at the time, it really wasn't registering to me what was going on. So I just told my mom, like, yeah, I'm bleeding, but I kind of just said it like nonchalant, like, oh, it's raining outside. I don't know, maybe I was just like in denial, but I just wasn't putting 2 and 2 together. So my mom was obviously concerned, and she was like, well, let's just go to the hospital. I'm sure everything is fine, but let's just go to the hospital to make sure that, there isn't anything bad going on. So my hospital was actually, I was supposed to give birth at Sinai. So we went to Sinai and we went to the emergency room, and I had never been through this before. I didn't have any children. So I didn't know that you were supposed to go straight to labor and delivery. So we just went to the emergency room. So we checked in at the emergency room, and the lady asked me, she said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is your pain right now? I told her it was a 7. She said, okay. She took my information, and I had to wait in the general public waiting room. So we waited for about an hour, and the whole time I'm just sitting there, and I'm just like, okay, is this normal? Like, I am pregnant, I am bleeding. The bleeding's starting to get a little heavier. So I went back and told her, I was like, well, my bleeding is getting a little heavier, and we've been waiting for almost an hour and a half at this point. So she was like, well, we'll take you back shortly, but your pain isn't, you say you're on a scale of 1 to 10, you're at a 7. So, that's not that bad. So I went back and told my mom, and she was like, what? No, this is crazy. We're leaving. So we left and ended up going to GBMC, which was the closest hospital. As soon as we got to GBMC, they took me straight back to labor and delivery. They hooked me up. I put on the robe. My mom left out the room, and the doctor came in, and she propped me up. And it was almost like I knew something bad was going on, because it was just kind of like a silence came over the room. And the first thing out of her mouth was, oh no. And after that, I just immediately started screaming. I didn't know why I was screaming. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why she said, oh no, but just something in me told me something bad was happening. So my mom came rushing into the room, and she said, what's going on? Why is she crying? Why is she screaming? And the doctor told her that my mucus plug had came out and my membranes were hanging out. So again, I'd never been through this, so I don't even know like what she means or what is it, what are you talking about? And she basically said that, at this point, all that could be done was they could keep me overnight. They could keep my legs up in the air pretty much. And if the mucus plug or if the membranes close back up, then I would be able to get something called a cerclage. And basically what the cerclage is a couple stitches that they put in your cervix. It closes everything up, and I would be on bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy. So at this point, I'm 18 weeks. And the crazy thing is, I believe this happened on a Saturday, and that Monday, me and my boyfriend were supposed to find out what we were having. And something in my heart knew that it was going to be a boy, but I didn't know for sure at this point, but I just knew like I was going to have a son. So I called my boyfriend who lived in DC at the time, and I called him, and I'm just crying and screaming on the phone, and he's like, well, what's going on? I can't understand you. My mom took the phone, and she's just like, Michael, you need to get in the car and you need to get to Baltimore as soon as possible. Joe could be losing the baby. Honestly, I don't remember much from that night after that point. I remember them taking me up to a room and hooking me up to the machine. And I remember laying there with like my legs pretty much in the air and just praying all night long. Michael finally got there. My mom was there. My dad came. And, you know, they were talking and trying to keep things normal. But I just remembered like trying to just kind of zoning out and just being in my zone and just praying and making promises to God and trying to bargain with him and saying, you know, please let me keep this baby. Please don't let anything bad happen. I promise I'll do this. I promise I won't do this. Just trying to bargain with him. So I pretty much stayed up that whole entire night, just in silent prayer. The next morning around maybe 6 or 7 o'clock, the doctor came back in, and this time it was a different doctor. I guess they switched shifts or whatever, but the new doctor came back in and she checked me. And the first thing I said, well, I mean, did anything happen? Did anything change? And she told me, well, unfortunately, you're starting to dilate. So I was like, well, what does that mean? She was like, it's really nothing else that we can do. Even if you were to give birth to the baby, the pregnancy would be, the fetus wouldn't be viable. And I think it just really bothered me because she referred to my child as a fetus. And I'm like, well, this is a baby. This is a human being. And, you know, there are premature babies born all the time. I was like, are you sure there's nothing you can do? There's no medicine I can take to slow it down or anything like that. And she was pretty adamant, like, even if the baby is born, he's going to have birth defects, or he'll be blind, or he'll be deaf. Like, she was just very negative. And it was just, I was already depressed, but it was just like not the last thing you want to tell someone who could possibly be losing their child, that it's nothing you can do. So they ended up giving me the medicine to break, well, she actually went in and broke my water because my water hadn't broke yet. So she went up, she took it upon herself to break my water. They gave me the medicine to start my contractions, and maybe like an hour later, it was time to push. And the whole time, it was just like, talking about it now is really weird because it was just like such an out-of-body experience that I kind of feel like I was just watching this happen to someone else and it wasn't really happening to me. And I probably literally pushed for maybe 2 or 3 times, and my son came out, and when he came out, I don't know what I was expecting because at this point, like I said, I was 18 weeks, so I didn't know how big the baby would be or if he would even be alive. And he came out and he wasn't crying, but his mouth was moving like he wanted to cry. He was moving his head back and forth. His limbs were moving, so he was clearly alive. And I was just so taken aback because he looked like a normal baby. He was very tiny and small, but he looked like a baby, and I just wasn't expecting that. So, of course, everyone in the room just immediately broke down crying. I was crying. My boyfriend was crying. My parents were crying. And it was just so weird. Like, I don't know, it was just a very weird thing. So the first thing I asked the doctor, once I saw that he came out alive, I was like, okay, well, he's alive. Can you take him back? Can you put him in a monitor? Can you do something to him? And she was like, there's nothing that we can do. And I think that still kind of bothers me to this day because granted, maybe there was nothing that they could do. You know, he was 18 weeks. But I just feel like they could have tried or made some type of effort. Or even if they didn't make an effort, make me think that they were just, you know, trying to make an effort. But to me, it just felt like they were just like, this is a throwaway. Like, it's nothing we can do. So they brought like the little baby bed in the room. They wheeled it in the room. They put him in the bed. My parents, so when I actually pushed him out, my parents had left out. So my parents came back into the room. Everyone was holding him, crying, passing him around. And I was almost scared to touch him because I didn't want to break him because his skin was almost translucent. It was very clear. And I was like high off medication. And I just was like so out of it. But he stayed in the room with us the entire time. And I was kind of like in and out of consciousness. I remember people calling me and my mom said so-and-so sends their prayers and all of that. Like I feel like everything was happening around me, but I was just kind of wasn't there mentally. We didn't even know we were having, well, it wasn't confirmed that we were having a boy until he came out and he was a boy. So I hadn't even thought of a name or anything like that. And my mom decided, so I told my mom she could name him. I was like, you know, what do you think his name should be? And my mom's maiden name is Bryant. So she said, well, let's just name him Bryant. And his dad's middle name is Lorenzo. So we decided to name him Bryant Lorenzo Conyers, which is my boyfriend's last name. And he lived for 2 hours. And the whole time, like I said, he was in the room with us. I remember when he passed away, it was very uneventful. He kind of just stopped moving. The priest came in the room and said a prayer. He baptized him, and that was that. He passed away. Shortly after, a social worker came in the room, and I mean, at this point, I'm just like, I don't care what's going on around me. And she started talking about my taxes, which I thought was so weird. And she was like, well, I don't know if this is an appropriate time to tell you or not, but since he was born alive, you can claim him on your taxes. And I was like, oh, nice to know, thanks. Like, but that's not what I want to hear right now, like, seriously. So yeah, that was that. And we stayed in the hospital for about 2 days. And I remember it was so the funny thing is, right before this all happened, literally maybe like a week before, I decided to announce my pregnancy on Facebook. So I had posted a picture of my pregnant belly, and of course everyone was commenting and saying congratulations. And I remember the day that I lost him, after everything had died down, and it was just me and my boyfriend in the room, looking on my Facebook, and people were still commenting on the picture, telling me congratulations, because they had just saw the picture. So that was kind of really tough, that people were saying congratulations, and I had lost a child, obviously. So we stayed in the hospital for 2 days. I finally decided to tell people slowly that Bryant didn't make it. And then the grieving process started. And it was, like I said, I think we actually even had a funeral ceremony for Bryant through March Funeral Home, which was really nice. We did a ceremony, and I didn't cry at his funeral at all. And a part of me, I feel like I was in denial. It took me a long time to kind of get used to the idea of being pregnant, that when I lost him, it didn't register to me that he was gone. So that took me a while to get over too. And I didn't cry at the funeral. I don't think I really broke down until my birthday. He died a week before my birthday, like exactly 7 days before my birthday. So the first time I had my first major cry and breakdown was on my birthday. And that's when I just kind of lost it. So yeah, that was in March of 2015. He passed away March 18th, 2015. The next few months was just a very tough time for me. I didn't know how to deal with grief. I got introduced to Roberta's house through another friend who had lost her child. And the program really helped me dealing with grief and kind of figuring out my emotions and everything like that. But I was determined that I was going to have another child. And they told me the appropriate time to wait is 18 months, and you need to go through the process and let your body heal, let your mind heal. But I was just determined to get pregnant right away, because that's what I wanted. And it took a while, but I found out I was pregnant again on my mom's birthday, which is November 4th. So November 4th of that year, I found out I was pregnant. And at this point, I'm just super traumatized. I'm I don't even want to tell anybody. I don't want to celebrate. I'm not saying nothing until the baby is in my arms. So I literally didn't tell anybody except for my mom and my boyfriend and maybe 2 other people until I was 6 months pregnant. And I couldn't hide it anymore because my stomach was huge. And that's when I decided to start telling people. And that pregnancy was very high risk just because of everything that happened with Bryant. So I did have to actually get the cerclage procedure at 13 weeks. I was on bed rest for a couple of weeks. I had really bad swelling. I had fluid in my stomach. It was just a very miserable pregnancy. But nonetheless, I was happy to be pregnant because of everything that had just happened. It was just a really tough time for me. But my son was born on July 4th. It was another boy, and I just always knew that I was going to have a son and, be a boy mom. So as soon as I found out I was pregnant again, I was like, oh, this is a boy. I just knew it. But he was born on July 4th, and we named him after his dad. His name is Michael. So his name is Michael Lorenzo Conyers III, but everybody calls him Bubba or Bub. And he's wonderful, but that birth experience was kind of traumatic as well, so I ended up having to get a C-section because he was so big, and they thought that it was a risk of him breaking his shoulders if I gave birth to him vaginally. So we did the C-section, and he got circumcised on the second day after he was born, and he wouldn't stop bleeding. So they couldn't figure out why he was still bleeding. They started to run all these tests, and they found out that he has a blood disorder. The blood disorder is called hemophilia. It's a severe blood disorder, and what it basically means is that his blood does not clot. So if he were to like get an internal injury or fall down and cut himself or hurt himself, if he doesn't get the proper treatment, then he could potentially bleed to death if it's that big of an injury. So now we have him on a medication called Factor 8, which is like a clotting factor. I have to give it to him 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now. He got surgery back in November to get a port installed in his chest. So before he had the port, we were actually just having to like search for veins and poke him 3 times a week to give him his medicine. It was very traumatic because he was, only 1, so it was tough. But the surgery definitely helped because now we have the port, and I give him the medicine at home, and he's getting used to it. And yeah, that's basically where I'm at now, just taking care of my baby. I talk about Bryant to him all the time. I know he doesn't understand now, but we do talk about him a lot. So I definitely want him to know that he has a big brother. I'm also a writer. So when I was going through all of this with Bryant and, with Bubba being diagnosed with a blood disorder, I needed an outlet. So I decided to start a blog. And on my blog, I talk a lot about my son. I talk a lot about Bryant, so both of my children. And that's where I'm kind of at now. Like I needed a way to preserve Bryant's memory. So that's why I decided to start the blog. And the blog has really helped me because not only has it helped me deal with my feelings and what I'm going through as a mom who has lost a child and who had another child, and this child has been diagnosed with a lifelong disorder, but it's helped me to connect to other women as well. So I decided to name the blog Moms Like Her. And it just brings all different types of moms who can relate to anything and everything together. So it's been a big help for me. And I bought a picture of Bubba. So this is Bub. This was on his first birthday. And he's 19 months now, so he'll be 2 in a couple months. On the 4th of July, he'll turn 2. And when Bryant was born, the hospital actually gave me like this little keepsake memory box. And in it, I actually put his urn in there. So like I said, we had a funeral for him. We got him cremated. So this is Bryant's little urn. And I also just keep like some ultrasounds, and this is the blanket that he was wrapped in when they gave him to me. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just like a funeral program and something that the hospital gave me, but yeah. So that's my story.
Do people in your life still talk about Bryant?
They do, especially my mom. So I think for her, she's been a great help for me. So she actually lost her first son, well, her only son. So I'm the oldest. The year after I was born, my parents had a son, and he passed away. I believe he was like 3 or 4 days old. He passed away from something related with his heart. So she told me at the time when it happened, she was asking God, like, why did you have me lose my only son? And it was just really hard for her to understand. But now she feels like God was preparing her to help me deal with my loss. So she talks about Bryant all the time. Of course, our son Bubba is like extra super duper spoiled. And she just I think she just pours everything that she wanted for Bryant into Bubba. So yeah, my mom definitely talks about him a lot. And I was actually surprised. One of my Facebook friends, a girl that I went to high school with, but I don't really talk to her often, actually reached out to me on Facebook maybe like a month ago and was just like, you know, you talking about Bryant and being so open with your journey has really helped me. So it helps to know that people that, you know, I don't even talk to on a regular basis still remember my son. So, yeah.
Do you feel like there are any cultural stigmas around loss?
I do. I actually was talking with Tamara, and she was telling me that the percentage of African American women who experience miscarriages and infant loss is much higher than like any other race or any other group, which is something I didn't know. So that kind of shocked me. And I think as far as like people not wanting to talk about it, that's another reason why I decided to do my blog. And even if I hadn't started a blog, like I knew it was going to be some type of way I had to have an outlet, because I don't want it to be pushed under the rug or just something that's not addressed or something that's not talked about. I want my son's life to not be in vain. If me telling my story helps one person or just, you know, gets his name out there and his memory out there, then that's enough for me. So I can't speak for anyone else, but I know for me, when I'm going through a loss or going through something traumatic in my life, it helps me to talk about it and not pretend like it didn't happen. Like, we have to talk about it. So, yeah.
Is there anything you'd say to other parents going through loss?
It's tough. I think, well, I can tell you what not to say to parents. At my son's funeral, someone, and I'm sure she had good intentions, but she walked up to me and she said, everything happens for a reason. And that kind of just like pissed me off, because I'm like, okay, my son, I don't want my son to have died for a reason. Or like, you know, I didn't set out with this pregnancy knowing that this was going to happen, and that's how I'm justifying it. So I think that's the last thing you need to say to people when someone's going through a loss, especially the loss of their child. Please don't ever say everything happens for a reason. Or I know how you feel, because unless you lost a child, then you can sympathize with me and you can sympathize for me, but you don't know how I feel. And just what helped me was just honestly prayer. I got a lot closer to God just going through this whole experience, because there were days when I just did not want to get out of bed. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I acted out in other ways by drinking and just making stupid decisions, because I didn't know how to mourn the loss. So just you know, pray and try to find an outlet, whether it's through writing or going to church or just hanging out with the people that love you and that are close to you, and that are going to be able to hold you and stick by you through your tough times, and through your good times and your bad times. I mean, that helps me, just staying away from toxic people, staying positive and praying. Yeah.